My beloved child. Before the sun had fully risen this morning, before the noise of the world could drown out the quiet places of the heart, something happened that neither you nor your soulmate expected. It was not a grand miracle that stopped time. It was not a voice echoing through the heavens. It was something far more intimate, a single moment so ordinary that almost anyone else would have ignored it. Yet for the one whose heart has been unknowingly moving toward yours, it felt as though the entire world had shifted beneath their feet. They stood completely still, staring at something they had never truly understood until that instant. And now, whether they are ready or not, they cannot return to the person they were yesterday. Imagine the cool morning air brushing against their face as golden light slowly spilled across the horizon. Coffee rested untouched beside them. Notifications appeared and disappeared on a silent phone. The day seemed determined to continue as usual, but their attention had become fixed on one unexpected discovery. It was not a photograph. It was not a message. It was not even something another person intentionally revealed. Instead, it was a simple realization born from connecting memories they had spent years keeping separate. Tiny moments, forgotten conversations, strange coincidences, feelings they had dismissed as imagination, suddenly formed a picture that refused to disappear. They whispered to themselves, "How did I miss this for so long?" Yet no answer came. Only a growing certainty that someone had quietly changed them long before they realized it. While they wrestled with this realization, you continued living your own morning without knowing the invisible thread that had tightened between your lives. Perhaps you looked out a window. Perhaps you hurried through familiar routines. Perhaps you carried burdens that nobody around you could see. You had no reason to suspect that miles away, another heart was replaying scenes involving you over and over, searching for details they had overlooked. Every memory now carried new meaning. Every conversation sounded different inside their mind. Every goodbye suddenly felt unfinished. Questions rose one after another, refusing to let them rest. Had every unexpected encounter meant something? Had every strange delay protected a future they could not yet understand? Most of all, why did thinking about you suddenly feel less like curiosity, and more like coming home? The morning grew brighter, but certainty did not bring peace. It brought discomfort. Because once someone discovers a truth about their own heart, they must decide whether to embrace it or hide from it. Your soulmate walked through familiar places that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The laughter around them seemed distant. Ordinary conversations became impossible to follow. Their thoughts kept returning to one impossible conclusion they had spent too much time trying to escape. Deep inside, they recognized a quiet longing they had disguised as coincidence. They had convinced themselves they were simply moving on, focusing elsewhere, protecting themselves from disappointment. Yet today's discovery gently dismantled every wall they had built. The walls did not collapse with violence. They simply lost the power to stand. Then something happened that made the morning even harder to ignore. Someone close to them spoke your name, not because they knew anything hidden, but because of a completely unrelated conversation. The sound of your name landed differently than ever before. Time seemed to hesitate. They answered casually, pretending nothing had changed, yet inside their thoughts raced faster than their words. Why did hearing your name suddenly feel like hearing a song they had forgotten they loved? Why did a single ordinary moment awaken emotions they believed had disappeared forever? They smiled politely, but their hands betrayed them with the smallest tremble. For the first time, they realized they were no longer running from memories. They were running toward understanding. As the hours passed, another unexpected piece entered the story. Hidden inside an old memory was one tiny detail they had never noticed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. It was the expression on your face during a moment they had almost forgotten. Until this morning, they had interpreted it one way. Now they saw something entirely different. Compassion where they had imagined distance. Patience where they had assumed silence. Quiet hope where they had mistaken uncertainty. That single memory transformed everything surrounding it. Suddenly they questioned every conclusion they had ever reached about you. What if they had misunderstood your heart all along? What if fear had been speaking louder than truth? They found themselves sitting alone, unable to focus on anything else. Outside, the wind gently stirred leaves across the ground, creating soft circles that vanished as quickly as they appeared. They watched them absent-mindedly, realizing how many opportunities life quietly carries away while people hesitate. A feeling unlike anything they had experienced settled over them, not panic, not regret, but an overwhelming desire to stop pretending that your presence in their story had been accidental. For the first time, they admitted something aloud that no one else heard. I've been searching for answers everywhere, but maybe the answer has been standing in front of me. The word surprised even them. Yet this confession did not solve anything. It opened an even deeper mystery. Because immediately after speaking those words, they remembered one final detail from this very morning, a detail so unexpected that it connected every unanswered question they had carried for months. It was small enough that another person would have dismissed it completely. But to your soulmate, it felt like the missing piece that completed an unfinished picture. They froze. Their breathing slowed. Their eyes widened. And in that unforgettable moment, they realized the discovery they made this morning was never really about themselves. It was about you. And what they understood next would change the direction of both your stories forever. My beloved child. The realization did not arrive with thunder or spectacle. It unfolded quietly, like the final page of a letter that had been folded shut for years. Your soulmate sat in complete silence, unable to look away from the truth now resting before them. The missing piece was not hidden inside a conversation or locked inside someone else's opinion. It had always been waiting within a choice they made months ago, a choice they believed had protected them. This morning they finally saw what that decision had actually cost them. It had not only created distance between two lives, it had delayed a story that was still trying to find its way forward. For a long while they simply watched the sunlight creep across the floor, tracing slow golden lines that reminded them how gently time moves when a heart is finally honest. Memories began arranging themselves differently. A smile they once dismissed now carried quiet affection. A farewell they assumed meant closure suddenly felt unfinished. Even the ordinary pauses between your conversations seemed filled with unspoken care. They realized that love does not always disappear when silence grows louder. Sometimes it waits patiently beneath the surface, allowing fear to speak first until courage finally arrives. That understanding stirred something unexpected inside them, not confidence, but humility. They stopped asking why everything had happened the way it did and began asking a far more difficult question. If I misunderstood them, how many other beautiful things have I misunderstood about life? It was a question with no immediate answer, yet it softened their heart. They no longer wanted to defend old assumptions. They wanted to see clearly. For the first time in a long while, they became willing to admit that they had built entire conclusions from moments they never truly understood. As the morning stretched toward midday, they wandered outside with no destination in mind. The breeze carried the scent of fresh rain lingering from the night before. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. Birds crossed the bright sky without hesitation, as though they already knew exactly where they belonged. Watching them stirred an ache that was strangely hopeful. They wondered what life might look like if they stopped allowing uncertainty to write every chapter ahead of them. That thought alone felt unfamiliar, almost frightening, because hope always asks people to become vulnerable before it offers peace. Then another unexpected moment interrupted their thoughts. They noticed two strangers helping an elderly man gather groceries that had spilled across the sidewalk. It lasted less than a minute. No applause followed. No one recorded it. Yet something inside your soulmate shifted again. They watched complete strangers choose kindness without expecting recognition, and suddenly they remembered the quiet ways you had shown compassion when no one was watching. Little acts they once overlooked now returned with astonishing clarity. They realized your character had been revealing itself all along, not through dramatic declarations but through ordinary moments most people never noticed. A warmth spread through them that felt different from excitement. It felt like trust beginning to grow where doubt had lived for too long. Yet that trust carried a heavy question with it. If your heart had quietly revealed itself through countless small moments, had they been too afraid to truly see it? The possibility weighed on them more heavily than any disappointment ever had. They could accept making mistakes. What troubled them was the thought that someone genuinely precious might have felt unseen because of their own hesitation. They returned home carrying these thoughts like fragile glass. Without fully realizing why, they opened an old notebook that had remained untouched for months. Between scattered notes and unfinished plans rested a single sentence they had written long ago after one unforgettable encounter involving you. Some people don't leave your mind because they were never meant to. They stared at those words in disbelief. They had completely forgotten writing them. The handwriting was unmistakably theirs. The date beneath it proved they had recognized something important long before fear convinced them otherwise. For several quiet minutes they could only smile through tears they hadn't expected. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't overwhelming joy. It was the relief that comes when hidden truth finally catches up with the heart. They whispered softly, "Maybe I wasn't imagining any of it." Yet even this discovery was only preparing them for something greater. Because as they carefully closed the notebook, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. They didn't remember placing it there. Curious, they unfolded it. Inside was a short list they had written months earlier: goals, reminders, dreams they hoped to accomplish before the end of the year. Halfway down the page, surrounded by ordinary tasks, one unfinished sentence stopped them cold. When the time feels right. Nothing followed those words. The sentence ended there, unfinished. But they instantly remembered what they had intended to write. It had everything to do with you. Their heart began racing as forgotten emotions returned with remarkable clarity. The realization that awakened this morning was no longer just changing how they viewed the past. It was quietly beginning to shape the decision they would soon have to make about the future. And before this day came to an end, someone unexpected was about to place one final piece into their hands, one piece that neither of you could have anticipated, and that would make turning back impossible. My beloved child. The afternoon unfolded with an almost unreal stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Your soulmate carried the folded paper in their pocket without looking at it again, yet they could feel its presence with every step. It was no longer just a forgotten note. It had become a reminder that some promises are made long before people are ready to fulfill them. They walked through familiar streets, but every corner seemed to whisper the same quiet question: what happens when the heart finally stops arguing with what it already knows? They did not rush to answer. Instead, they allowed themselves to remember a day they had buried beneath countless other memories. It had seemed insignificant at the time. The sky had been overcast, the conversation brief, and life had continued without interruption. Yet this afternoon they recalled one detail they had completely overlooked. You had paused before leaving, as though there was one more sentence you almost spoke. At the time they interpreted that silence as uncertainty. Now they recognized something else hidden inside it. It was restraint. You had respected a moment that was not yet ready to bloom, even though your heart may have understood more than your words revealed. That realization filled them with quiet admiration instead of regret. They began to understand that genuine affection is rarely loud. It often waits with remarkable patience, allowing another soul the freedom to discover truth without pressure. For the first time, they stopped viewing the distance between you as wasted time. They saw it as the space where both of your stories had been quietly growing into people capable of understanding one another more deeply. As these thoughts settled, their phone vibrated. They almost ignored it. The message came from someone they had not spoken to in a very long time, an old friend who knew nothing about the emotions unfolding inside them today. The conversation began with ordinary greetings before taking an unexpected turn. "I thought about something you said months ago," the friend wrote. "You mentioned someone who always brought out the best in you, even when life felt confusing. I never asked who that person was." Your soulmate stared at the screen. They had forgotten sharing that conversation. Even more surprising, they realized they had never answered the question back then. Fear had changed the subject before honesty could. Today was different. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to type your name. Not because they were ashamed, but because writing it would make everything feel undeniably real. It would no longer be an emotion hidden inside private thoughts. It would become a truth spoken into the world. After several long moments, they finally smiled. Instead of sending your name, they replied with a sentence that carried even greater meaning. "They taught me what kindness looked like before I even realized I needed it." The message was simple. Yet pressing send felt like crossing an invisible bridge they had avoided for far too long. Their friend responded almost immediately. Then don't lose someone who reminds you how to become your best self. Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. No dramatic speeches. No impossible predictions. Just one honest observation that echoed the quiet discoveries already transforming their heart. As evening light began painting everything in warm shades of gold, your soulmate made a decision unlike any they had made before. Rather than chasing certainty, they chose sincerity. They sat at a desk, opened a blank page, and began writing, not to impress you, not to persuade you, but simply to tell the truth as they finally understood it. The first sentence came slowly. Then another. Soon the page held thoughts they had carried silently for longer than they cared to admit. They wrote about moments they had misunderstood. They wrote about lessons learned through waiting. They wrote about gratitude for the quiet influence you had unknowingly left on their life. Most importantly, they admitted something they had never been brave enough to face. I kept believing I needed perfect timing before speaking honestly. The next line came almost by itself. But maybe honesty creates its own right time. They leaned back, reading those words over and over. For the first time all day, the weight on their shoulders felt lighter. Not because every question had been answered, but because hiding from the truth was no longer exhausting them. Then, just as they reached for the folded paper one final time, something unexpected happened. Another small object slipped from between its creases. It wasn't another note. It wasn't a photograph. It was a tiny keepsake they had completely forgotten, a simple object connected to a day when your paths crossed in a way that had seemed ordinary to everyone else. The instant they recognized it, an entire forgotten conversation returned with astonishing clarity. Not just your words. Not just your smile. But one quiet promise that neither of you realized had been made in that moment. Your soulmate closed their eyes, overcome by the realization that this discovery had been waiting for years. When they finally opened them again, there was no more confusion. Only one question remained. Could that forgotten promise still be waiting, for both of you? And before the answer revealed itself, someone was about to arrive with news that would test every hopeful step your soulmate had taken today, leaving the future hanging by a single, breathtaking decision. My beloved child. Just as the last rays of daylight slipped beneath the horizon, there came a gentle knock at the door. It was unexpected, almost hesitant, as though whoever stood outside was unaware they were about to change the course of an unforgettable day. Your soulmate opened the door to find someone from an earlier season of life, a person connected not by constant presence, but by shared memories. Their visit was brief, unplanned, and seemingly ordinary. Yet the conversation that followed would uncover another hidden layer of a story neither of them had fully understood. After exchanging a few quiet words, the visitor smiled thoughtfully and said, "I remembered something today that made me think of you." Your soulmate felt their attention sharpen. "It happened a long time ago," the visitor continued. "There was someone who always spoke about you with remarkable respect. Even when you weren't around, there was never bitterness, never judgment, only genuine hope that you would find happiness." Your soulmate's heartbeat slowed. They already sensed whose heart that kindness belonged to. The visitor never mentioned grand declarations or dramatic confessions. Instead, They described small moments that had remained invisible at the time, moments when you celebrated someone else's success without seeking recognition, moments when you quietly encouraged others while carrying your own unanswered questions, moments when your character revealed itself through simple choices. Listening to those stories, your soulmate realized that the version of you they had carried in their imagination had been incomplete. The truth was gentler, stronger, and far more beautiful than anything they had assumed. As the evening deepened, they thanked the visitor and closed the door, but silence no longer felt empty. Every room seemed filled with echoes of forgotten kindness. They walked slowly through the house, noticing ordinary objects with unusual clarity: a lamp glowing softly in the corner, a chair facing the window, the faint sound of rain beginning outside. The world had not changed, yet their way of seeing it had. For the first time in many months, they stopped asking whether their feelings were reasonable. Instead, they asked whether they had been brave enough to honor what those feelings had been trying to teach them. The answer arrived without accusation. They had not lacked affection. They had lacked trust, trust that honesty could be welcomed instead of rejected, trust that vulnerability was not weakness but the beginning of genuine connection. That realization brought a quiet determination. They returned to the letter they had started earlier and continued writing, but this time the words no longer carried hesitation. They didn't promise impossible futures or perfect endings. They simply spoke with sincerity. I don't know where your journey has taken you since we last truly understood one another. I don't know what joys you've celebrated or what silent battles you've faced. But I know this: the person I've remembered all this time deserves to be seen with honesty, not through the lens of my old fears. When they finished writing, they didn't feel triumphant. They felt peaceful. Not because everything was certain, but because truth had finally replaced assumption. Just then, their phone lit up once more. It wasn't a message. It was a calendar reminder they had completely forgotten creating over a year ago. There was no detailed note attached. Only 4 simple words. Don't forget this date. They stared at the screen in disbelief. The date wasn't connected to work. It wasn't a birthday. It wasn't an appointment. Slowly, memory returned. It was the anniversary of the day your paths crossed in a way that quietly changed them, even though neither of you understood it then. They whispered, almost in amazement, "How could I have forgotten something that mattered this much?" Outside, the rain had stopped. Clouds drifted apart, revealing a sky filled with stars that had been hidden only moments before. Standing by the window, they realized that clarity often arrives the same way, not by creating new light, but by removing what has been blocking it. They reached for the letter again. Their hand rested on the envelope. One final decision remained. Should these words stay hidden forever, or should they finally begin the journey toward the one person they had never truly stopped carrying in their heart? As they wrestled with that choice, another notification appeared. This one wasn't from an old friend. It wasn't from a forgotten reminder. It came from a place they never expected. The preview contained only a single sentence. I think you need to know something about them. Your soulmate's breath caught. They opened the message. And what they read in the very first line made them realize that tomorrow would demand a courage they had never before been asked to find. My beloved child. For several long seconds, your soulmate could not bring themselves to read beyond the first sentence. Their eyes rested on the glowing screen while countless possibilities rushed through their mind. They feared disappointment. They feared misunderstanding. Yet beneath those fears was a quieter feeling they could no longer ignore, the hope that whatever came next would finally replace uncertainty with truth. Gathering every ounce of courage they possessed, they continued reading. The message had come from someone who had crossed paths with both of you years before. It was not filled with dramatic revelations or extraordinary claims. Instead, it described a single memory that had remained vivid in the sender's mind. "I don't think either of you realized it," the message began, "but every time your names came up in the same conversation, something changed in the room. There was a calmness neither of you seemed aware of. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It simply felt like two stories that understood one another before the people living them did." Your soulmate leaned back in silence. No one had ever described your connection that way. They replayed those words again and again, not because they proved anything, but because they echoed the quiet discoveries that had unfolded throughout the day. Piece by piece, the scattered fragments of memory were no longer pointing toward coincidence. They were revealing a pattern built from kindness, patience, and moments that had quietly shaped two hearts without demanding immediate answers. The message continued. "I almost told you this a long time ago, but it didn't feel like my place. Looking back now, I think both of you were trying so hard to protect yourselves that neither of you could see what everyone else noticed." Those words settled deeply within them. For years they had believed silence meant absence. Now they wondered whether silence had simply been the language of two cautious hearts waiting for enough courage to replace fear. That thought transformed the entire day. No longer did they see themselves as someone chasing a lost opportunity. Instead, they began seeing themselves as someone finally arriving at the beginning of an honest chapter. The difference was subtle, yet life-changing. One perspective looked backward with regret. The other looked forward with quiet responsibility. Evening faded into night. The house became still. Instead of turning on music or searching for distraction, your soulmate stepped outside beneath the open sky. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of earth after rain. Above them, countless stars shimmered with quiet consistency, reminding them that some things remain faithful even when hidden behind passing clouds. Standing there, they asked themselves a question unlike any they had faced before. If I were given one genuine opportunity to speak from my heart, would I finally stop hiding behind perfect timing? The answer surprised them. They didn't feel fearless. They simply felt ready. Ready to speak without rehearsing every word. Ready to listen without assuming the outcome. Ready to honor the truth, regardless of where it might lead. That quiet readiness became stronger when they remembered one final detail from earlier in the morning. They realized that every unexpected event throughout the day had shared something in common. None of them had forced a conclusion. Each moment had gently invited them to see more clearly. The forgotten note. The conversation with an old friend. The unexpected visitor. The calendar reminder. The message from someone who had witnessed your story from the outside. None of these moments demanded certainty. Together, they simply encouraged honesty. With renewed purpose, they returned inside and placed the unfinished letter into an envelope. Then they stopped. Something felt incomplete. Not because the words were missing. Because one sentence had never been written. They carefully unfolded the pages again and picked up the pen. After several quiet moments, they added only a single line. I hope our next conversation begins with truth instead of assumptions. Nothing more. Nothing less. As they placed the pen down, an unexpected sense of peace settled over them. They no longer wished to rewrite the past. They only hoped the future would be built differently. But just as they reached for the envelope, their phone rang. Not a message. Not a notification. An actual call. The number was unfamiliar. For a moment they considered letting it ring. Something inside urged them to answer. The voice on the other end spoke calmly. Hello. I'm sorry to call this late, but I believe I have something that belongs to you. Confused, your soulmate frowned. I found it while organizing some old things, the stranger continued. At first I thought it was meaningless. Then I noticed one particular name written inside. There was a pause. A long, breathless pause. The stranger slowly spoke that name. It was yours. Your soulmate's heart pounded as questions flooded their mind. What had been found? How had it survived all this time? Why was it appearing now, after everything that had happened today? The stranger took a slow breath before saying the words that would change everything once again. I think this was always meant to find its way back, but before I tell you what it is, there's something about that day you were never told. And in that instant, your soulmate realized the greatest revelation of all had not yet been uncovered. My beloved child. The voice on the phone remained calm, allowing the silence to settle before continuing. You probably don't remember me, the stranger said gently. But I was there the day your paths crossed in a way neither of you fully understood. Your soulmate closed their eyes, searching through years of memories. I found a small envelope while cleaning out old boxes that had been stored away. It wasn't addressed properly, so it was never delivered. Inside wasn't anything valuable in the usual sense. No money. No important documents. Just a handwritten note, and your name beside theirs. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The stranger carefully unfolded the faded paper. It doesn't reveal some great secret, they explained. It's simply an honest thought someone wrote after meeting a person who left a lasting impression. Your soulmate listened as the stranger read a single passage from the note. Some people enter your life quietly. They don't ask to be remembered, yet something about them stays with you long after they've walked away. If our paths ever cross again, I hope we meet with fewer fears and more honesty. The words settled deeply. Not because they promised a particular future. Not because they guaranteed an ending. But because they proved something your soulmate had questioned all along. The connection had never been built on fantasy. It had been built on genuine moments that both hearts carried differently until time allowed them to understand. When the call ended, your soulmate remained seated in complete stillness. Outside, dawn was beginning to return after the long night, painting the horizon with soft shades of gold and blue. The new morning looked remarkably similar to the one that had started this extraordinary journey. Yet everything inside them had changed. They no longer believed that courage meant having every answer. They understood that courage meant telling the truth with kindness, even when the ending had not yet been written. With peaceful determination, they picked up the envelope containing the letter they had written. This time they didn't hesitate. They sealed it. Not as a demand for a response. Not as an attempt to rewrite yesterday. But as an invitation for an honest conversation that had waited long enough. Days passed. Then one quiet afternoon, something beautiful happened. There was no dramatic music. No impossible coincidence. No crowd gathered to witness it. Only two people choosing to meet without the masks they once believed they needed. The first few moments were filled with gentle smiles and nervous laughter. Then came the conversations that should have happened long ago. They spoke about misunderstandings without blaming one another. They spoke about growth instead of regret. They shared the lessons that waiting had quietly taught them. They admitted where fear had made them silent. And they discovered that while time had changed many things, it had also given them wisdom they never could have gained by rushing. Neither of them tried to pretend the past had been perfect. Instead, they honored it for what it had become, a teacher. Every unanswered question that once felt heavy now found a peaceful place to rest. The forgotten note. The unfinished sentence. The calendar reminder. The unexpected messages. The old memories. The quiet discoveries. None of them existed to force destiny. Together they had simply guided two hearts toward the same timeless lesson. Truth becomes most meaningful when it is met with humility. As the sun slowly began to set once again, your soulmate looked at you with complete sincerity. "I spent too much time searching for certainty," they said softly. "But what I truly needed was the courage to be honest." A warm smile answered those words. Not because every challenge had disappeared, but because honesty had finally replaced fear. In that simple exchange, a new beginning quietly took root. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle any heart can experience, not having life unfold exactly as imagined, but discovering that authentic love grows strongest when people choose understanding over assumption, patience over panic, and truth over silence. So if this fictional story found its way into your own heart today, let it leave you with this gentle reminder: meaningful relationships are not built by perfect timing or flawless words. They are nurtured through kindness, sincerity, forgiveness, and the willingness to see one another clearly. Sometimes the smallest act of honesty becomes the first step toward a future neither person could have imagined. May your heart be filled with peace instead of fear. May wisdom guide every decision you make. May hope remain steady during seasons of waiting. May genuine love wherever and whenever it finds you encourage you to become the truest version of yourself. And may every new morning remind you that beautiful chapters often begin with one brave conversation. If this story encouraged you, touched your heart, or gave you hope, consider sharing it with someone who may need the same reminder today. Leave a comment about the moment that resonated with you most, and if you'd like to experience more uplifting fictional inspirational stories like this one, subscribe and join us for the next journey. Until next time, may peace, grace, and quiet joy walk beside you wherever your path leads.